So the 1939, just before Hitler begins his assault on Poland and Czechoslovakia, the violation of the pledge of Britain toward the Jewish people. The crux of the new British policy in a secret cabinet memorandum on January 18th, as the MacDonald memorandum explained, we cannot accept the contention that all Jews as such have a right to enter Palestine. We cannot avoid an eventual clash, but you're not going to avoid the eventual clash. Do what's right in the meantime. No. If we continue to carry out the Balfour Doctrine, between the forces of persecuted, desperate, brilliant, constructive Jewry in Palestine, he actually wrote this, and the widespread pan-Arab movement, the pan-Arab movement worldwide, which is rallying to the defense of its weakest brethren, oh boy, the poor old Arabs of Palestine, who are murdering Jews without opposition and without policing force of the British troops that are still trying to protect the Jews, so-called, under the Balfour Doctrine. Arab detestation of the Jewish invasion into Palestine being what it is, they even admit it. Yeah, that's what it is. It would be wholly wrong to suggest that this large Arab population should one day in their own native land, it's not their native land, and against their own will, come under the rule of the newly arrived Jews. What happened to partition or separation? So they're just hypocritical and murderous. They're sanctimonious, secret meetings and decisions and writings of secret papers. These paragraphs became the basis of the British government's policy. It was in secret. What happened to the Balfour Doctrine? At the same time, attempts were made to seek the opinions of various colonial governors as to the possibility of at least some small Jewish immigration elsewhere, even to the Soviet Union. Wow. What do you call complicitous? How do you spell that? Britain, during beginnings of World War II in the late 30s. The Zionists adhered to that very Jewish right to enter Palestine, which was established in the Churchill White Paper of 1922. Do they know about the secret stuff? The government now made an attempt to persuade Weizmann to abandon all Jewish rights in Palestine. It was during the cabinet meeting of January 27th that Malcolm MacDonald how do you reinterpret? You don't reinterpret, you just make it up. The Churchill White Paper statement of 1922, that the Jews were in Palestine as of right and not on sufferance, which referred only to those Jews who were already living in Palestine in 1922, and not to those who reached Palestine later or might do so in the future. Wow. You know, if their nose fell off like Pinocchio or grew out, couldn't have been any more clear how hypocritical this is. Clearly, this is not the message of Churchill's White Paper. During February and March 1939, new decisions were made by the cabinet with regard to Palestine. Each of these decisions proved fatal to Palestine being kept open to refugees. So, clearly, this was not the message of Churchill's White Paper. During February and March 1939, new decisions were made by the cabinet with regard to Palestine. Each of these decisions proved fatal to Palestine being kept open to refugees. The British government were taking active steps to check and, if possible, to halt the continuing flow of illegal Jewish immigrants fleeing from Central Europe to Palestine. Neville Chamberlain declared he would quit as Prime Minister and Churchill would take over. Yeah, so Chamberlain says that it was of immense importance from the point of view of strategy, to have the Muslim world with us. And he added, and if we must offend one side, let us offend the Jews rather than the Arabs. So the Arabs, the Muslim world, took the side of Hitler, World War II, against the English, the British. Wow. Every step the British make backwards is a step in the wrong direction. The 1939 Palestine MacDonald White Paper violates the Balfour Doctrine, and it encourages Arabs to fight Jewish settlement all the more by violent means, because it wins. Violence wins till Jesus Christ comes again. By the end of April 1939, the Palestine White Paper was finalized imposing upon Palestine several restrictions which would fix an upper limit of 100,000 on the number of Jewish immigrants to be admitted over the next following 5 years, after which the Arabs would have an effective veto on any further Jewish immigration. Guess what? It didn't work in 48. The Jews won. Yay! MacDonald told his cabinet colleagues of May 1st certain points had been inserted to meet Arab pressure and which, perhaps, would have been omitted if the matter were looked on strict merits. The House of Commons debated the new white paper, against which Leopold Amory spoke with much force, telling the House that the government's watchword had now become appease the Arabs, and to do so by breaking faith with the Jews. Amory went on to say, the MacDonald white paper is a direct invitation to the Arabs to continue to make trouble, why not say continue to kill? As for the Jews, they are now told that all the hopes that they have been encouraged to hold for 20 years are to be dashed to the ground like they have been in Europe for all these ages. All the pledges and promises broken. Wow, that's sad. They, the Palestinian Jews, are a formidable body of people. They are composed largely of younger men who have undergone military training and are quite capable of defending themselves if only we allowed them. The British wouldn't even step forward. Winston Churchill spoke with force and bitterness against what he believed was both a betrayal of the Balfour Doctrine, and amen to that, and a shameful act of appeasement. He seemed to have stood alone. Churchill drew attention to the large Arab as well as Jewish immigration into Palestine since the beginning of the mandate. Not only Jewish immigrants, but Arab immigrants have been drawn to Palestine by its newfound prosperity. Oh, those awful Jews, they brought newfound prosperity, electricity, water, and the Arabs, like the Jews, had been drawn from a wide geographic area. That wasn't their home. They came in to enjoy Jewish established prosperity. The MacDonald white paper, known henceforth to the Jews as the black paper, led not only to widespread distress among world Jewry and strong protests throughout the Jewish community in Palestine, but also to a widespread feeling among the majority of Jews, both in Palestine and beyond, that henceforth the future not only of Jewish immigration into Palestine, but of the whole nature of a future Jewish entity there, depended first and foremost not upon the British, with whom power lay, but upon the renewed efforts, struggles, and perseverance of the Jews themselves. By making the possibility of Jewish statehood more remote, and even impossible, the MacDonald white paper had the reverse effect to their intentions by stimulating and sharpening the Jewish goal of statehood and full independence. Towards the Abyss, July-December 1939. During the summer of 1939, the number of Jewish illegal immigrants seeking to reach Palestine grew considerably. In response, the British government continued with mounting vigor to seek to stop the ships reaching Palestine. During the autumn of 1939, the British government made several attempts to influence the United States' opinion against the illegal immigration. In his article, New Testament Times writer Levy wrote, under normal conditions, illegal immigrants can constitute the best constructive elements for the country, since those whose entry is effected with the approved of national Jewish organizations are previously trained for Palestine life and labor conditions. But groups organized by the revisionists are based on the wider assumption that any Jew willing to go to Palestine is acceptable. It is no secret that the Jewish population of Palestine is sympathetic and helpful to all organizations now taking the latter wider view. It is interesting to note that even in the Palestine, Arabs in general are not antagonistic toward these illegal immigrants. Many of the latter recount instances of Arab charity when they wandered in unknowingly into Arab villages, while some of the fellaheen ran to report them to the police. The refugees report others sheltered the newcomers, sharing their bread and olives. To show its displeasure at the continuation of illegal immigration, the government had decided a short while ago to suspend all illegal immigration. At the same time, illegal immigrant ships were still being intercepted and turned back. Jewish refugees were being denied entry into more and more countries. Many other countries were tightening their entry regulations and frontier controls. On September 1st, 1939, guess what? The Germans invaded Poland. In view of severe persecutions against Jews in Poland, relaxation of British colonial restrictions met with a negative response. With the coming of war, the British government had not only continued but even intensified its attempts to halt the flow of illegal Jewish refugees. Throughout the winter months of 1939 and 1940, while the British were thus fighting the illegal Jewish immigration, the Germans were imposing their evil rule upon Poland. For the Jews of Palestine, war had brought a new spirit of determination. Recruitment and a desire to serve the Allied cause went parallel with the hope of bringing in, legally and illegally, as many European Jews as could establish and escape the torment of Nazi rule. Churchill, now First Lord of the Admiralty, urged Parliament to form a Jewish army in Palestine to aid in the war effort. It might have been thought a matter for satisfaction that the Jews in Palestine should possess arms and be capable of providing for their own defense. They were the only trustworthy friends we had in that country. The Arabs turned toward the Nazis, and they were much more under our control than the scattered Arab population to replace the 11 infantry battalions hitherto locked up in Palestine. Churchill was not successful. There was fear of repercussions throughout the Muslim world. There they go. This same War Cabinet of 12 February 1940 discussed the 1939 White Paper decision to limit Jewish land purchase in Palestine. The land purchase regulations were put into force. And the Arabs turned against the British. They were nothing compared to the British military. They're going to wipe them out. Leave them alone. Let the Jews have their way. Despite this setback to their position in Palestine, the Jews now pressed for the creation of a specifically Jewish military force which could fight the Germans, be on the side of the British. Both the Foreign Office and the War Office opposed it. Ridiculous. Early in 1940 November, 2 ships reached Haifa with 1,771 illegal immigrants. The High Commissioner refused to allow them to land, and they were transferred to a French liner to deport them to the Indian Ocean island of Mauritius. But Churchill raised an objection. Churchill's telegram was decisive. The patria deportees were allowed to remain in Palestine, first in the internment camp at Athleet, and within a year at Liberty. But in response to this, the British government suspended the quota for legal immigration for 3 months. Subsequently, the quota for April to September 1941 was also suspended. Just a hatred for the humanity, regardless what side are. We had to be on the side of the Arabs. And there were punitive measures for those Jewish immigrants and the patria. Conditions of the detention of the deportees should be sufficiently punitive to continue to act as a deterrent to other Jews in Eastern Europe. Wow. As the war continued, the Zionists were appalled by the mounting campaign of terror against the Jews of Poland and by the continuing refusal of the British government to modify in any way the immigration of land purchase restrictions of the 1939 White Paper. Beyond the Abyss, 1939-1942. From the moment that the Germans, marched into Poland in September 1939, Nazi sadism found horrific outlets on Polish Jewry. Only a tiny remnant of the Jews of German-occupied Russia survived the Nazi executions. Holocaust, resistance, and flight. Following the Wannsee Conference of January 1942, the Nazis began the systematic deportation and murder of Jews from all over Europe. Their destination was the death camps, most of which had been set up on Polish soil. By the time of Germany's surrender, May 1945, 6 million Jews had been murdered, many others at forced labor camps. Others had been shot dead while on the march or left to die of hunger at the roadside. Others starved to death without even water in the sealed railway trucks. Some at the hands of doctors sadistically experimenting. Hajj Amin, the Mufti, had gone to Berlin, where on April 8th he expressed publicly the sympathy of the Arab nation for Germany and offered Hitler the active support of the Arabs. Wow. Now they're directly against the British. Sir Harold MacMichael rejected Iraqi Jewish immigration in view of persecution in Iraq on the grounds that there was no work for them to do. This in spite of Jewish agencies' assertion the previous April that there was a shortage of more than 4,000 agricultural workers on Jewish farms and settlements. Come get a job. Under a previous War Cabinet decision of 27/1942 of November, of all illegal immigrants who had been detained would have to be deported to the Indian Ocean during the island of Mauritius, and held there until the end of the war, when they would be released on condition that they went elsewhere